I think that there are legitimate questions that should be asked about Joe Biden. He is 81 years old, but Donald Trump is 78 years old. And what I've been appalled by is my former newspaper, the New York Times, has run something like 194 stories about Joe Biden's cognitive issues and a handful about Donald. And at many of his rallies, and there are, if you go on YouTube or Google to search, you can find compilations of videos where Donald is going along talking like I am at a rally instead of why is this not front page news on a par with Joe Biden on that night? Secondly, I think Joe Biden has and has had all the way along a terrible comms team. Communications people. Anybody with a brain in their head in communications would have prepped him by saying, you're going to take a nap before you go on the air. I don't care if you're 40 years old. You're going to take a nap, and would have fitted him with lines that don't get lost in policy. Because in that debate, one of the things almost nobody's commenting on is Trump didn't answer any of the questions that were asked. In every case, he diverted. Secondly, he lied. There were CNN's very excellent fact checker, Dan Daly, has established 33 either lies or seriously misleading statements. Why isn't that the focus of coverage? Well, I mean, the fundamental reason is that's not news. We know that Donald Trump lies. No, you keep hammering that point in the news. And also, Donald disappears as he did in 2016 and 2020 for days at a time. You haven't seen Donald now around for several days because Donald, who those who may not know, I've covered and known since 1988. In fact, I was the first person ever to write about him becoming president, and that was on July 10th, 1988. He has big ups and downs emotionally. And so he withdraws. And you can see in many videos, Donald walking and you can see he's lumbering. There's no spring in his step. There's no excitement about it. Biden, I think it's misleading about how Biden walks. Biden has a spinal arthritis. He does not walk well. I have a 1971 injury that as I've gotten older, if you walk behind me like at an airport, I sort of limp. I don't walk in a quite normal fashion because of an injury. Doesn't affect my brain or ability to do work, only how I walk. And Biden gets out there and rides his bicycle. And I think I mentioned this on your show about a month ago. My fantasy scenario for the debate, and it could still happen in September, is that Joe Biden drops to the floor and does a Jack Palance. He does one-arm push-ups because he's capable of doing them. He does push-ups with like schoolgirls. There's videos of that, very recent ones. And, he could then say to Trump, he could get up on his feet and say, hey, Donald, it's okay. You can use both arms. Because what works most effectively with Trump is humiliating him. He has no sense of humor. And if he were humiliated like that, he would completely lose it.
I mean, the thing we witnessed, David K. Johnston, was concerning, was it not, with Joe Biden? How did you, there are two questions. A, how did it land with you? But B, and this is perhaps the far more important question, the political ripple effect. Give us the realities on that.
Well, I think that an awful lot of professional Democrats are concerned about Biden. I think that's quite clear. But at this point, if Biden withdraws, a bunch of things happen. First of all of the delegates are released at the convention, and they can vote for anybody. So we could end up with a very messy convention. Second, if anybody listening to this thinks that the Republicans won't challenge any other person put on the ballot by the Democrats by saying, well, you missed deadlines, this wasn't properly done, you can't appear on the ballot at all, they don't understand how the Republicans are using the courts to attain that which they can't attain at the ballot box. And finally, we have a system. Let's assume the discussion I noticed today on CNN and MSNBC and the one radio show I listened to was, well, the concern isn't the next 4 months. Joe Biden will be fine, but he can't make it through 4 years. Well, let's assume for the moment that's true. Joe Biden's got 2 years left of being able to be president before he'd have to resign. We have a system for that. It's called the vice president. It served us well for 240 years. It got us, Teddy Roosevelt in the White House and Harry Truman. So I think this is a non-issue. If he can't perform for any reason, then Kamala Harris becomes the president of the United States.
The Democrats shooting their own, metaphorically getting rid of their own, is sort of their side hustle. They did it with Al Franken. They're quick to provide a purity test, and then when somebody does not, I'm not saying that this isn't of great concern, but the notion that Democrats are the ones quickly turning, that doesn't surprise me in the least. I mean,
Mark, I agree with you about that. I mean, Democrats have three longstanding problems. They have a long history of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. They eat their own, and Al Franken is probably the best example of that. I've talked with Al Franken about the horseplay that was going on the airplane at the time. That's what people in comedy do. One of my daughters is a lyricist and librettist for musicals, and she did comedy for a long time. And some of the stuff that they did sort of like as a father, I wasn't great with, but that's how comedy works, especially when you're making stuff up as you go along to experiment. And then the third thing is that the Democrats are so quick to turn to eat their own, to question what they're doing, instead of saying, we're going to dance with whoever brung us to the dance. And I don't think that enough people will be influenced by the debate performance, particularly if you watch the very next morning, as I did the whole time Biden spoke for roughly 2 hours in North Carolina. He was clear as a bell.
Yeah. And indeed, Fetterman, we ran some video of him talking about campaigning alongside Biden over the weekend in Pennsylvania. He said it was 90 degrees. He said, I'll tell you, the guy didn't lose a step. I mean, we're out there for hours. Yeah. So, even
if you assume the worst, that's why we have a 29th Amendment, or 27th, I don't remember the number at the moment, to temporarily replace the president. We have a vice president ready to go. And, the one time we needed to invoke that for reasons of a resignation, that worked out pretty well. Jerry Ford was president for 26 months, and, he steered the ship straight ahead. So
under the new Supreme Court ruling, Nixon would never have had to resign.
That's exactly right. Richard Nixon wants his presidency back. Let me tell you what's appalling about the Supreme Court immunity ruling. It isn't just that they manufactured a whole new legal theory and law that has no basis whatsoever. It's that in the last Second Amendment case the court issued earlier this year and last year, they articulated this principle that gun laws have to be based on American tradition and history. In fact, as I read it, all Supreme Court decisions are supposed to be based on historical precedent. So, I guess we're going to bring back wife beating and make spousal rape legal again. But that all went out the window in the immunity case. And the problem in the immunity case is, in Federalist 69, which I doubt many people read, but you can go on the internet and find it. It's free. Alexander Hamilton wrote it. In Federalist 69, it says the president can be prosecuted for any crimes he's committed. Mitch McConnell, in January of 2001, right after the failed effort by Donald Trump to overthrow our government, said he can be prosecuted. And so this Supreme Court decision is cockamamie, and it leaves all these unanswered questions about what's an official act, what's an unofficial act. I don't see in the New York case the payoffs to Stormy Daniels. That, let's remember, the case is about stealing an election, corrupting an election. That's the overriding charge, corrupting the election through these criminal means. Most of that happened before Donald Trump became president, and signing a personal check is not an official act. So I don't understand why Judge Merchan indicated, well, I may have to just dismiss the whole case.
Yeah, that was an odd thing, given what you just said. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not possible that paying off someone you had sex with for less than a minute is an official act, especially when it occurred in, I think, 2005 or 2006.
I do see how Chutkan now, the D.C. judge, has to go through the various, 45-page indictment and decide this is an official act, that wasn't an official act. Some of these things are no longer indictable. That's a word.
Right. And if you read the whole thing in context, it seems to me that the thrust of that entire 45-page indictment is you tried to overthrow the government. And it's not possible if that's an official act. The oath you take as president is to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, domestic and foreign. And trying to overthrow the government, trying to murder your vice president, trying to kill Nancy Pelosi, those cannot be official acts if we live under rule of law. Now, if we're going to live in a Stalinistic dictatorship, and we're going to see the Republican Party, who my whole life they've spent, the Kremlin, bad, can't trust the Kremlin. There's Kremlin agents crawling around Washington. They're hidden in the mattresses. And now they embrace the Kremlin. This is just the most astonishing development. I debated on Middle Eastern TV a couple of days ago, one of Trump's surrogates. And he's just perfectly comfortable with, well, yeah, the guys in the Kremlin, we support them. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a massive pivot in policy. And, we have this conversation, you and I think it's at the 75th anniversary of NATO, or so these celebrations are going on, and conversations about NATO and about a robust alliance and the expansion of NATO, et cetera. And the reality is that Donald Trump has very much expressed reservations about NATO continuing. Now, the president, I don't think, can actually just pivot us out of NATO the way he did out of the Paris Climate Accord. He'd need Congress, I think, involved in that. But nonetheless, it reflects where what he's thinking and, where he's looking.
Well, in line with that, Mark, let me point out the Lincoln Project. That's the effort by Republican consultants to stop Trump. These are political consultants who worked on the Romney campaign, Bush, et cetera. They have a new ad out. Imagine what will happen if Donald Trump gets back in the White House. And one of the things they point out is that he'll just issue executive orders doing things. And who's going to stop him from doing these things when the Supreme Court's made it clear that if it's an official act, he can do anything he wants? Well, as commander-in-chief, he can say, we're withdrawing from NATO. He could order the return of most of our troops over there. And I don't know what would stop him from doing these things. I really don't. And I think we should all be concerned. He will definitely start rounding up massive numbers of people. And if you think American-born American citizens won't be deported in those cases, you haven't looked at the history of previous efforts to do things like that.
This you make an interesting point that I hadn't considered, honestly, about the NATO thing. You don't have to pull out of the alliance completely. You hobble the alliance. Right. By pulling your troops out. That's really clever. And to be honest, it's such an obvious thing, I didn't even think of it. It's a little like what they're doing at the Justice Department. When they get back in, they plan to dismantle the Justice Department and reshape it with loyalists. But what they're trying to do in the interim, even the House GOP is trying to sap money from the support of the Justice Department and other government agencies with which they have issues. I wanted to quickly ask you about something that was on your website that you helped found, you co-founded, DC Report. I thought it was a really good piece, and it relates to the Heritage Foundation, and we have some video I'll play for you in a moment from there. But the idea somehow that we may have to reckon with this Project 2025 because Trump seems to be, in this bizarre Alice in Wonderland way, the odds-on favorite to win. And Trump himself is trying to take baby steps away from Project 2025 because he knows that it's not super palatable. I mean, it's a right-wing handbook that he's obviously using. It does reflect his actual tendencies, but he wants to water it down so the public doesn't get shocked.
Right. Well, Donald, who is mentioned more than 300 times in the Project 2025 document, which was written by people he's endorsed, supported, thoroughly in bed with politically, is doing what he always does. Well, I don't disagree. I have no idea what's in it. I don't know anything about the project. And I agree with big parts of it, but not other parts. Well, I'm sorry. If you don't know what's in it and have anything there, And here's the principle about Donald that I've written about since almost when I first met him in 1988. If there are crystal clear waters, Donald will muddy them and then say, well, we can't tell. It's all cloudy in there. You can't see what's in the bottom. And that's just a fundamental principle. I think the Democrats are mishandling Trump about all of these things in a very bad way. Don't come back at Donald Trump with my budget deficit's smaller than your budget deficit, even though that's true. First of all, most people don't know what the budget deficit is or the federal debt and how they're not the same thing. You come back at Trump and you either mock him and make fun of him because he has no capacity whatsoever to laugh at himself, or you hit him hard with visceral things. You're a convicted felon in Florida. You may not even be able to vote, and you want to be president of the United States. Why did you sit there for 3 hours and do nothing as people were calling for the murder of your vice president? Why didn't you immediately? And don't tell me it was the duty of Nancy Pelosi. She doesn't control the military. You were the commander in chief. And what about Dobbs? The Democrats should be saying as a mantra constantly, Dobbs, 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 Dobbs.
That's because by extension, that's Supreme Court, Supreme Court, Supreme Court, which I think is now everybody's got that memo.
And by the way, Trump has now called for increasing the Supreme Court to 12 members. Now, that's kind of bizarre, 12, because you'll end up with split decisions, 6-6 maybe. But I've, for many years, long before Donald announced in 2015, have said the Supreme Court should be increased in size. Congress can set whatever size it's, can make it 3 people, can make it 300. That we should increase the court to 15 members because that's the number of justices needed to supervise the various different lower courts. Some of the justices are doubled up. And Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, in his annual reports keeps saying the workload's too heavy. And I've written about cases that district court judges and appeals court judges have basically thrown in the trash that are very important because they're really complicated and difficult cases on things like regulating fossil fuel companies and electricity pricing, cheating, and things like that. I mean, those are difficult, complex issues. We need to have several hundred more federal district court, that is trial court judges. We need to have probably 100 more appellate judges. And we need to have a larger Supreme Court. And by the way, I had a conservative, I was on a radio show with once who said, well, we can't have 15 justices. The Supreme Court building isn't large enough for that. Yeah, that's a real problem. We couldn't build another Supreme Court building and then put some other court in the existing building. I mean, you haven't thought that through for a moment, have you, pal?
Listen, if Ben Carson can put $1 million into remodeling his office there at Housing and Urban Development when he was a Trump cabinet member, you can put $1 million into, building out a little more space for the new justices. That's scary, though, because they always talk about, I'm talking about the expansionist tendencies on the court from Trump, because they always talk, the GOP did, about how the Democrats are going to expand the court. The Democrats are going to load the court. And now it's something that Trump does unapologetically. Very interesting. And now a word about this Kevin Roberts and the Heritage Foundation, which is underscoring so much of what MAGA is about. Tony, can you play for David just a little bit of this guy and just your comments after this?
Oh, and Kevin, if you just want to freewheel it and respond to those clips and tell folks what the Heritage Foundation is doing to protect the rule of law and to protect individuals in this great country, pleasure to have you on.
Well, Professor, my great friend, thanks for filling in and doing a great job. 3 things. Number one, in spite of all this nonsense from the left, we are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. No one in the audience should be despairing. No one should be discouraged. We ought to be really encouraged by what happened yesterday. And in spite of all of the injustice, which of course friends and audience of this show, of our friend Steve know, we are going to prevail. Number two, to the point of the clips and of course your preview of the fact that I am an early American historian and love the Constitution, that Supreme Court ruling yesterday on immunity is vital. And it's vital for a lot of reasons, but I would go to Federalist number 70 if people in the audience are looking for something to read over Independence Day weekend, in addition to rereading the Declaration of Independence. Read Hamilton's number 70, because there, along with some other essays, he talks about the importance of a vigorous executive. You know, former congressman, the importance of Congress doing its job, but we also know the importance of the executive being able to do his job. And can you imagine, Dave Bratt, any president, put politics off to the side, any president having to second guess, triple guess every decision they're making in their official capacity? You couldn't have the republic that you just described. But number three, let me speak about the radical left. You and I have both been parts of faculties and faculty senates and understand that the left has taken over our institutions. The reason that they are apoplectic right now, the reason that so many anchors on MSNBC, for example, are losing their minds daily, is because our side is winning. And so I come full circle in this response and just want to encourage you with some substance that we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's just offensive. It'll remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. Your thoughts, David? That's the guy who runs the Heritage Foundation.
Well, first of all, he's giving you a terrible false impression of the area he claims to be an expert on. When our Constitution was written, Congress was seen to be the dominant of the three co-equal branches. The president's job was simply to do whatever the Congress told them to do. And that was largely true until the nature of world economies with industrialization and whatnot changed. And we've been giving more and more power to presidents and diminishing the authority of Congress. And the Supreme Court has just taken onto itself a great deal of the executive's authority with what's called the Chevron decision. Basically, instead of giving deference to the experts at various places, the biologists, the geologists, the mathematicians, et cetera, at federal agencies in implementing the laws Congress passes, the courts now will decide these matters of, well, what exactly did Congress mean by this or that language in the statute, which is a prescription for a full employment act for lawyers, a massive increase in the employment of lawyers. But this idea that we have a Second American Revolution and it will be bloodless as long as the left allows it, that is so un-American. And let's remember who the Heritage Foundation is. The Heritage Foundation was founded by super wealthy people like the Anschutz family, Coors Beer and Southern Pacific Railroad, the Walton family after Sam Walton died, the Koch brothers, and their like, because they don't want to have an America where you and I and the janitor at your kid's school have any influence or power. They don't believe in democracy. They believe in, hey, we're rich guys. That shows we know what we're doing, and you should just let us do what we want. The Heritage Foundation has long stood for denying health care to people, even though it would save our economy a great deal of money if we had universal health care. I've shown, by the way, that if we had universal health care, it's the equivalent of starting income taxes at $600,000 a year for a married couple. Everybody below that, which is more than 99% of the public, wouldn't have to pay income taxes. Now, that's, by the way, a statistical measure. In the real world, it'd be more like $100,000 or $200,000, which would still be a big improvement.
You're saying the benefits that would accrue because you had public health care system would be the equivalent of what you just described.
And in addition, many people who are taxpayers who something happens to them, like the case of a man in Idaho whose hand was mangled and he was told, well, workers' comp isn't going to cover your hand. It would cost you $15,000. We could make it all fine. The guy didn't have it. So this taxpayer was converted into a disabled tax eater. And you and I, for the rest of his life, have to support him because he can't work anymore because of this hand injury, not in any job he's fit to do. And this is just dumb policy. The people who are backing Trump at the Heritage Foundation are not conservatives. Conservative means to maintain the things that we know work. The oldest surviving principle in Western civilization is progressive taxation. It's in the Old Testament. It was crucial to the founding of democracy in Greece 2,500 years ago. It is an ancient principle, the oldest surviving principle in Western civilization. That means progressive taxation is the most conservative idea of all in our Western civilization. And yet it's attacked by people like the Heritage Foundation, the Tax Foundation, and others. And that's because they're not conservatives. They're reactionary, authoritarian, even in some cases totalitarian in their views. And this implication of there will be violence unless the left bends over and does what we tell it to do is so deeply offensive. Unfortunately, that was on an obscure broadcast outlet.
That was on the Steve Bannon broadcast. That guy was filling in for him.
Actually, like this show on the internet, so it's not broadcast.
Right.
But you haven't seen this on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, David Muir at ABC, or Lester Holt, the nightly NBC News. It hasn't been on the PBS report. It isn't on NPR. And that's a real serious problem because all of these institutions go, well, that's sort of like way out there, and maybe we'll do a little feature about it. This should be major top-line news that there is a group of rich, powerful people who want to overthrow the American order. They want a revolution, as the professor just said.
Exactly. It's one of the things I was sort of hinting at when we first started, because I feel like the media oxygen is all about, Joe Biden meeting with a Parkinson's expert, Joe Biden, struggling with his gait, whatever it might be. But this is certainly deserving. It falls into that email thing. What about her emails? What about her emails? Like, guys, you're losing your way here. And I've lost all my time with you, but I did want to just mention again, this piece of DC report does a nice job of reducing Project 2025 to some key elements, and how moving forward, Trump really is singing from that hymnal, and he's trying to water it down. But the actual plans are very much included in 2025's
And the reason we should be so worried about this is that when Donald came in office in 2017, he had not expected to win. He wasn't prepared, unlike candidates usually are, where they've got a lot of people picked out. This time around, he has a huge team, a very well-funded huge team. They've picked out people for various positions. Trump will decide who he wants to put in which of these, but there are 4,000 political positions. Trump will fire civil servants left and right, people who are dedicated, serious people. And, like all promoters of authoritarianism, particularly fascism, although Donald doesn't even know what fascism is, one of the things you have to do is you have to discredit the news media. We're the enemy of the people. I've spent my whole life just lying to people. I mean, after all, what fun would there be in trying to dig out hidden truths and tell that when it's so easy to lie? And here's the thing that should really scare people. Donald has said he plans to fire the top generals and admirals. Well, history is replete with examples of what happens when someone comes in and wants to be a dictator. There are always captains, majors, lieutenant colonels who will sell out their country for power and glory. And if Donald, and I warned about this, by the way back in 2015 or 2016, if Donald starts firing generals and admirals, that's when you know that this is a dictatorship that he's making. He's declared he will be our dictator. Oh, just for one day. And if you believe that, I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
David K. Johnston, congratulations again on your professorship.
Thank you.
Really, yeah. And we have our cup runneth over with questions for you, et cetera. We'll table them. Yeah. But we'll jump on them with 2 feet next week. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Again, I encourage you to check out dcreport.org, which is the website that David helped start. He's the co-founder, and there's a great piece, as I say, my Terry Schwadron right now up there about just this stuff we're talking about. We'll talk next week. Thanks, David.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.